a lot of people are concerned about addiction. Can you speak towards addictive properties of
Yeah,
psychedelics?
totally. So, I know we'll go back to the neuronal on the sort of the neurochemistry level. It's totally different in terms of addiction. Um, Typically, the
Hmm.
addictive quote unquote substances out there are hitting on the dopamine reward system. So just like when you go onto social media and you see that little red light, they're playing with the same thing. That's a reward system. It's like the Pavlovian dog. You see the light, you drool, you're like, oh, it's something, and I'm gonna go press it and see what's going on there, right? So that's kind of like the same dopamine reward system, right? Well, all psychedelics work on a
Hmm.
serotonin system, tryptamines, phenethylamines. Typically, that's what they're working off of. So um, it's like a different neurochemistry. So in terms of these experiences, you're not going to have the same um, physical addictions as you would have with the dopamine system. There might be psychological, wants or desires where people are going to want to go back to the same experience. And we hear about that in terms of the idea of spiritual bypassing. Like, oh, I had this big spiritual experience. I realized that I have to go, you know, be a better person, but actually I'm just going to have another experience next month and then it'll be all better, and that's why we have to talk about immigration, these different
Hmm.
types of things, right? So there is that potential there in
Hmm.
terms of people wanting to have more experiences or those different types of things. But in general, from a physical addiction potential, it's not there in the same way. In addition, a lot of these materials, a lot of these substances actually work for helping with addiction. So there's some studies right now around, and there's been studies for quite some time around iboga for opioid addiction or opioid substance issues, right? And I actually have a good friend of mine
Hmm.
who, um, the story, he was one of the first patients in St. Kitts with Dr. Mash. We did the studies, I think, in the 90s, something like that. And she was looking at ibogaine for
Hmm.
heroin substance issues, right? And my
Hmm.
friend said that he had been doing
Hmm.
heroin for probably about 15 to 17 years, something like that. He started having
Hmm.
dreams that was basically like, you're out. If you don't quit this, you're not going to live through this year. And so he was like, okay, well, I got to
Hmm.
figure something out here because I'm going to die otherwise. And the biggest thing with a lot of these, opioid addiction is that the want might be there, but the cravings and the withdrawal are so
Hmm.
difficult for the person that they can't ever break out of it.
Hmm.
Because yes, they could want it all day
Hmm.
long to get out of it, but then the next day they wake up and they're in pain and they're sore and they're feeling the need or the craving to have more, and it's hard to sort of break through that. He said that he had an iboga experience or ibogaine experience, which is about 24 to 36-hour experience. Is pretty heavy duty. He said from
Hmm.
a inner experience, he was able to go back to those traumas that led to his substance use issues, and he said I was able to revisit them with
Hmm.
the emotional volume was turned down. So he's like, now I'm not
Hmm.
so stuck in the experience, but I'm able to take like a step back, really
Hmm.
see it again and rechange that narrative. So from the psycho spiritual aspect, it helped. But then Ibogaine also helps on the
Hmm.
sort of craving and withdrawal part of it. So for about 5 days after, maybe a little bit more, you have like a window of opportunity where you don't have any cravings, you don't have any withdrawals, and you're able to sort of reassess life, replan habits, redo things that could
Hmm.
be towards a more healthy life and that different type of thing. And this is actually how it was
Hmm.
found by, I think, Howard Lutzoff was the person who discovered that it was useful for heroin addiction in like the 70s. I could be wrong on those dates, so double check on that. But what do you call
Hmm.
he I guess the story goes that he was looking for heroin. He wasn't able to find any. Somebody's like, hey, you should try this ibogaine stuff. He's like, all right, well, I need to do something tonight, So he did the ibogaine, and then there's a story about him waking up the next morning. He said, "Is like I had some orange juice, I made my coffee, I read the morning paper. It was like halfway through the day, and I was like, I haven't thought about heroin once. And usually, I'm like, as soon as I wake up,
Hmm.
I have to do my heroin, otherwise I have these withdrawals. So that like woke people up to being like, oh wow, not only is this an ancient traditional practice which is used in Gabon for visiting the ancestors, but now also it also helps people that have sort of the problems of the Western world, which is these major addictions and things like
Hmm.
that, or people are stuck on things that maybe they don't want to be, and this gives people a way out. So ibogaine would be one of those. There's some studies too on
Hmm.
ayahuasca for addiction or substance use issues. There's some
Hmm.
studies, even I think they're looking at mushrooms or psilocybin for tobacco cessation, which I think is an interesting thing too
Hmm.
because What we're really getting at is the substance is the thing that people are talking about. But underneath that, what we're really
Mhm.
talking about is this sort of addictive quality or substance issue quality, right? Because if you look at some of the
Mhm.
traditions, tobacco is also a master plan, you know, and so
Mhm.
tobacco isn't the addiction part; it's the something else going on there, right? The tobacco, if done in a proper way, has been used in many different cultures as for cleansing, for purging, for connecting to the ancestors, to the spirits, and all these different types of things.
Mhm.
So again, this is Western science looking at this and says, okay, a lot of people have an
Mhm.
issue with tobacco. How are we going to help them solve that